Welcome to the Trailhead from UltraSignup, where big adventures begin. Trail running is so much more than just a sport. It's a community, a culture, a way of seeing the world. On this show, we're not dissecting splits or debating shoe specs. We're here to get to the heart of it all, the people, the places, and the stories that speak to the soul of the sport. Join me, Zoe Rome, and my co-host, Brendan Leonard, as we'll bring you conversations with the everyday athletes, local legends, quirky characters, and creative minds who make trail running what it is. Messy, joyful, gritty, and deeply human. Because it's not just about chasing finish lines. It's about the friendships forged on long climbs, the lessons learned in the pain cave, and the weird, wild moments that remind us why this sport is about so much more than the miles. If you're enjoying the Trailhead, the best thing you can do is help other people find us. Follow us on Spotify and subscribe wherever you listen. That way you'll get notified when a new episode drops. And if you have 30 seconds, leave us a review. It really does make a difference. And if you know someone else who might be into this, send it their way. Word of mouth is seriously everything. While you're at it, check out 2 other shows from the UltraSignup podcast network. The Buzz with Buzz Burrell for the sharp philosophical deep dives you all know and love, and Between Two Pines for chaos and comedy. Something for every corner of your ultra running brain. Thanks for tuning in.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Precision Fuel and Hydration, who have helped me become less dumb in my running and racing the past couple years with their free fuel and hydration planner, which gives you actual target numbers, including sodium intake, grams of carb per hour, and volume of fluid you should intake per hour. Because, hot take here, what works for a 30-year-old pro runner who's winning marquee races might be a little different than what works for you. My long run this morning was also brought to you by Precision Fuel and Hydration, specifically the PF 1000 hydration packets, which have 500 milligrams per sodium per packet, and their PF 30 chews. I've also been converted to gels, or more specifically, their giant PF 90 gel, which is basically a big gel packet with 90 grams of carbs and a twist off top. To try out the Fuel and Hydration Planner, visit precisionhydration.com, and the planner is right at the top of the page there. But also, wait, if you want 15% off your first order, use the code TRAILHEAD26 when you check out.
Today, we are chatting with a climate writer, endurance runner, a little bit about the intersection of climate and running. And while those are some pretty big topics to try to parse out, I wanted to sort of bring it down to the human level to ground things and start things off. How often do you think about the environment when you're out running, or like your connection with land, your connection with the environment, or some of these bigger than human ideas?
Well, I mean, every time, especially just like, in the summer here, it's like you're looking for smoke. In the winter, you're like, yeah, is there enough snow? And this winter, there's not enough snow.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely always aware of it, more so than if I worked out at a gym. And we're just like watching sports talk shows or whatever's on in your gym. That's what's on in my gym all the time. Yeah.
A lot of Food Network and Fox News at my gym.
Yeah.
A chaotic combo. Yeah.
Interesting. I was at a YMCA running the treadmill once, watching the Pioneer woman cook something on a show, and I thought, this is incongruous.
I was like, not sure that my ancestors foresaw me running for like 2 hours on the treadmill, watching the barefoot Contessa make a super intricate lasagna.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's always, and like, yeah, I don't know. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think you kind of hit on something I've been feeling a lot of this winter. So I'm definitely a runner first before, almost anything else, particularly skiing. And even though I live like in a mountain town in Colorado, skiing is kind of the thing to do here in winter. It's been I would say it's been an extremely mild winter, but the more accurate phrasing would be that it's been the warmest and driest winter in recorded Colorado history. And with the worst snowpack, again, like since humans have been writing things down in Colorado, this is the worst winter that we've had. And I keep finding myself having this feeling that I'll be out on a run, really enjoying it. It feels like amazing. There's not a ton of snow on the ground. I'm wearing a sports bra in like February. And as soon as I like allow myself to feel how good it feels, there's also this twinge of just like, oh man, this is maybe really not how it should feel. So it's like this sort of joy tempered with a little bit of like, oh man, it probably shouldn't feel good the way that it does right now.
That said, still preferable to the television being on and being on a treadmill, in my
Still,
opinion. For me.
still beats watching Food Network on the treadmill. But one of the reasons I'm pumped to chat with our guest today is that he has, I think, a pretty optimistic view on climate, realistic but optimistic, and has some really interesting ideas on how runners particularly can connect with the environment in a way that goes beyond personal responsibility and beyond the doom and gloom that I think so often climate conversations get couched in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. As well as being an actual legit trail, an ultra runner, and ultra distance adventure.
Trail and ultra runner.
Hi, I'm Pavel Cenkl. I live in Prescott, Arizona. I'm currently the Dean of Academics at Prescott College in Arizona. And I've been, out on the trails, running, biking, skiing, climbing for, goodness, as long as I can remember. Far too long, I think, now.
So you actually grew up hiking in New England, a lot of time in the White Mountains. You worked at the famous AMC huts. When did moving through landscapes become something bigger for you than just recreation, just getting outside?
Yeah. I mean, I started doing that really as a kid, like many of us do, right? Going hiking with your parents. And I was fortunate that they liked to drive up every weekend. We grew up outside of Boston. Drive up to the White Mountains and stay there for the weekend, sometimes stay there for weeks on end in campgrounds, and just getting to know the trails and the mountains. I really grew to be very sort of familiar and very comfortable in them. And when it came time to that, what am I going to do for a summer job? That just seemed like such a natural fit to go work for the AMC. So I did that for a number of years. And I will say my favorite stint with the AMC was working a winter where I worked at Zealand Hut, and I would go a week without seeing anybody and just go skiing every day, in these beautiful birch glades behind the hut, and really just getting to know the place and spending time with it. So when it came time to do, so I've got a doctorate from Northeastern in English. When it came time to do that, it's like, you know what? I could write about these things, and I could, as an excuse to do research and go hiking at the same time. So I ended up writing this book called The Vast Book of Nature, which really looks at the long 19th century, from when the Northeast was, a bit more wild and, not really sort of settled by commercial enterprises, or, it didn't really become a tourist destination until the end of the 19th century, right? So looking at how that happened, and the stories that the land told over that time. And so, that's really when I think my perception to place started to shift a bit, sort of having lived there, having, these embodied experiences on the trails, and saying, you know what, there's another layer to this. There's the historical, there's the layer of all the people that were here before me. There's what we're doing to the land now, and how we can kind of engage in that conversation maybe through the movement as well. So I've carried that with me since.
Did you happen to, while working for the AMC, did you happen to do the AMC hut traverse?
I did.
You did? In under 24 hours?
Yes, I did. I did it in, my goodness. I always hate to show my age. I just turned 55 this week. So, that's a milestone for me. So I'm feeling a bit old. So when I go back and say, all right, I did that in 1988, when I was, was I 17, 18 years old, and, went from Carter Notch Hut over on one end all the way to Lonesome Lake on the other end. I think I did it in like about 22 hours or something like that. I'd hardly call it running, but certainly call it moving long distances slowly, which is kind of what I call my own trail running these days anyway.
Yeah, we've had a number of guests on the show who grew up in the White Mountains and have become some of the most successful ultra runners and trail runners in the world.
There's something in the water up there, I think.
Well, I mean,
or just running in the whites makes you hard.
Well, exactly. Running in the whites, and then, running in Vermont as well. it's always struck me the differences between Northeastern trails and trails in the West. It's really, now I live in Arizona where almost every trail is graded as a mountain bike trail. I'm like, wow, where's the steep uphills? Where are the, where do I need to use my hands? This isn't all of the mountains.
Yeah. Well, switchbacks, that's a thing
Yeah.
that are fun. It's fun to have in the West.
They don't really know how to do that in the Northeast.
It's a new
Yeah.
technology we have out here in the West. It's really groundbreaking stuff. So in addition to rambling around in the White Mountains, you also started one of the US's first collegiate trail and mountain running teams. How did that come about?
I did. Well, again, I think it's just an extension of how do you use this thing? I wouldn't necessarily say it's a talent, but maybe a preoccupation. How do you leverage this to actually do some good in the world? And that's, as we talk about some of the later things I've done, I really started to think about, it's an extreme privilege to be able to, I'm going to go out and run for a day, and I don't have to worry about anything. I'm well supported. I've got food drops. I've got all this stuff for me. So how can I, do that in the community where I was, which was at the time Sterling College in northern Vermont, where my wife and I lived, and we raised our son there. We lived there for about 15 years. And I was dean at Sterling College, and it's, really small school. I think we maxed out at about 120 students when I was there. So I was able to do all sorts of different things. Typically a dean wouldn't get to do all those things. So I said, well, why don't we start an athletic department? Because we're out here, we're a very experiential wilderness skills focused school. So we started a Nordic ski team, which we were 3 miles from an Olympic Nordic ski training center, the Craftsbury Outdoor Center. And then, my own love of running. It's like, well, let's get students excited about, trail running. And so I started a team, and we really only had one competitor in the Northeast, which was College of the Atlantic. And their president at the time, Darren Collins, a long distance runner in his own right, started a team called the Black Fly Runners. And then we met a few times kind of halfway through. We took a trip to Maine. We did that sort of thing. So it wasn't, on some sort of, D1 circuit or anything like that. But it was, for me, it was really fun because I taught a class for credit, not just a team, but a trail running class where it was
What?
yeah, I know. These days you could go to college and get credit for trail running.
Barely made it out alive with a PE credit. This would have been life-changing for me.
Well, I think it actually, I'd like to think that it was life-changing for some of the students. So we took someone who had, they'd never run more than a 5K or something like that in September. And by December, we had entered a 50K, ultra marathon, which was in laps. It was one of the, I forget what it means, but the TARC races that are outside of Boston. There's a trail running group there that sponsors this in the Middlesex Fells. And it was perfect, 8-mile laps. So you could participate in an ultra and just do 1 lap or 2 laps or do all the laps if you wanted to. And it gave them this sense of, huge sense of accomplishment. Like, I'm doing this ultra marathon. And it was great because some of them had really not run much before. And for me, that was incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, I had no idea it was that small. When I actually read your CV and I was like, wow, that's 78 students is it's a bit low for D1 athletics. But it's still in business. I spoke at Green Mountain College in Vermont many years ago, and they closed down in 2019, I think. And I thought that was a small school. But
Yes,
yeah.
I taught at Green Mountain for a semester.
Did you? Okay.
When they closed, many of their faculty and students actually came down here to Prescott College as well.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. How is that? Could you, I'm familiar with Prescott College. I assume Zoe is too, but could you kind of explain how it's different from, normal of what we think of as colleges for listeners who may not have any familiarity with it?
Absolutely. Well, it's better than any other college. I'll say.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Next question.
No, we're actually just celebrating our 60th anniversary this year. So we were founded in 1966 after, there was really no college in this area. Now, although we are still the only 4-year private university in Arizona, we are one of 3 universities that's in and around Prescott. And so that's really exciting to have that much higher education in a town of about 40 or 50,000. But Prescott College has been for 60 years really focused at the intersection of ecology and the environment and community through action and practice. We've been really well known for our adventure education program. A lot of our graduates have gone on, whether they've taken our master's degree in outdoor leadership or whether they've just gone on and worked with Knowles or worked with Outward Bound, or started their own businesses. We often joke that we were groundbreaking in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, but we graduated so many proficient people that they're competing with us now, right? So I think we were, and we continue to be like one of those places where if you're interested in, using the landscape as your classroom, really engaging in conversations about, land use, ecology. We have a lot of field ecology courses. We have courses that go from here to hike on the Muir Trail over in the Sierra Nevada. We have a field campus in Mexico, about 12 hours south of here, that focuses on marine ecology and sort of cultural identity, working with the indigenous cultures and the Mexican culture there. And we've got a campus in Kenya where we actually co-direct that with the Maasai and talk about land use, economy. And we're within sight of the Masai Mara Game Reserve, which abuts the Serengeti National Park on the Tanzania border. So we're really trying to engage our students in authentic place-based experiences that then leads to degrees in things like, outdoor leadership or field ecology or, sustainability and things like that. And, as we've grown over the last 20, 30 years, we've actually skewed more toward graduate programs. And so we have PhD programs in sustainability education. We've got master's programs. Our biggest program actually is a clinical counseling program that I think the unique part of that one is most students sign up. They're really interested in our adventure-based and nature-based counseling. So even in counseling, we have students go up to Alaska and do sort of adventure-based counseling experiences and sort of think about how place and experience work together in that way.
That's so cool. And on that subject of embodied education or place-based learning, in the long arc of your career, one of your bigger initiatives or projects has been to run hundreds of miles across Iceland, Scandinavia, the Arctic, all under this banner of Climate Run. So for people who haven't heard of it, what is this project and what are you actually trying to do with Climate Run?
Yeah, that's a great big question.
Yes. Just describe your career.
I like people in a long arc of my career. And I said, I'm feeling really old. And Zoe's like, yeah, a really long career now. Around probably 2013, 2014 or so, I was really reflecting on what we had talked about here earlier, which is how can you use this effectively hobby, right? I'm not a professional athlete by any means, but how can you use this thing that you do and you're really passionate about, spend a lot of time with, and have it sort of be meaningful to more than just yourself, right? And so I was teaching courses in, in sort of environmental literature and in northern studies, so studies of circumpolar cultures and Arctic literatures and some classic adventure narratives as well, going to the South Pole and all that sort of stuff. So I've always been drawn to those places. And when I was given an opportunity I don't even know, I think 2007 or 2008 to teach a field course for Stirling College where I said, well, you know what? I went to Iceland once when I was 6. So I've got some experience there. And they said, here, great, take a group of students and go to Iceland and, sort of explore what that landscape is like. And I think the seeds for Climate Run were planted in and around, those types of field courses where going to a place where, climate change and the impact of climate change on landscapes was more explicitly visible than it might be in a place like Vermont or, England, where I spent 5 years, or, other places. You can actually literally in Iceland, actually in 2014, was one of the first places or the first place in the world where scientists were able to tie, post-glacial rebound, so isostatic rebound where the Earth's crust kind of comes up after the glaciers melt, specifically to human-caused climate change. So, and they put all these really sophisticated, sensitive GPS readers, right, across the landscape, and they could measure, and in some places the Earth's crust was rising about 40 millimeters a year. And so I was thinking, I want to go to a place where the impact that we're having around the world one is visible, but it's visible to such an extent that the literal Earth's crust is moving as a response to the impact that we're having changing the climate. So I picked a route across Iceland. I think I can't remember if it was 2014 or 2015. And of course, this turned out to be a theme with some of my subarctic and Arctic runs, that it was a really wet spring, and it was a late summer. So I had to slightly shift the route. It was going to go right up the center of Iceland, slightly to the west, but still, from the south coast across the highlands, and down to the north coast on the Arctic Ocean, over, I think it was 50 miles a day over 3 days, so 150 miles total. And one of those, at the height, I was actually passing a shield volcano that was just to the west of me, called OK. And that was, again, a momentous year, because right around then they had declassified the glacier on the mountain, because it had melted to the extent that it was no longer a glacier.
Wow.
I mean, that for me was like, a pretty obvious impact. Like, oh my goodness, we talk about glacial melt, and you look at the glacier, and there are all of these reef photography projects that, glaciers are shrinking, and you can measure the volume in tons of ice, and then so much water is being lost and that sort of thing. But to see the glacier completely disappear off the side of a mountain, that was pretty dramatic,
I
right?
mean,
So
feel like
yeah,
running is that really powerful way of bringing those climate stories down to the human level. In Chamonix, some of the trails that go up and around and near the glaciers at the base of Mont Blanc, they have these ladders for the steeper and more technical sections of the trail. And the glacier has shifted to an extent they have to keep adding additional rungs to the ladder, because things that were solid and secure not that long ago are just gone. And they've had to build this whole trail infrastructure to bridge that gap. And I feel like it's those little visceral moments on the trail like that that make these stories so much more potent, when so often it's like this big, like we talk about, like the term is like hyper object. It's a thing that is too big to relate to as a human. Like, I can't fully comprehend climate change as a concept, but I can understand this rickety ass ladder needing to get longer.
yeah, absolutely. And thanks for citing Tim Morton there. Um, really, really appreciate that and his work. I think there's a glacier on the cover of that book too, or something.
Fellow
Uh,
English major.
yep, there we go. So part of what was interesting around that, and that was the first of several runs that I did, several long distance runs, and I thought, well, I went into it with a particular sort of framework in mind. I had a bunch of sponsors, and was able to sort of get support and get a lot of press. For whatever reason, got Icelandic press, and I couldn't actually read what they said about me, but I'm assuming it was all good.
You were very handsome. That's what they said. It's like the handsome American.
That's right. I was a really small figure on the horizon. I think that's really what it was.
Yeah.
And I think that was the year that I made it into like Vermont's top 10 athletes of Vermont, in the Vermont Sports Magazine, which was
An illustrious list for Vermont,
absolutely. I thought
It's a
it
deep
was cool.
bench.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily feel like I deserved to fit among the other folks on there. But so I came into it really from that perspective, and when it was, there were a number of moments where you have, it's not a runner's high, but it's the epiphany that you get when you realize that you are, in an ultra run, you are at this moment of vulnerability, where, even if you're in a race completely separate from other people, you realize that, well, you're out there. And whether it's your dehydration, your exhaustion, your physical, you just can't go anymore, but you've got 50 more miles to go. That the boundary between yourself and what's around you, for me, begins to really blur. And as a sort of English slash environmental humanities slash philosophy, major, so thinking about that really really intrigued me. Like, where are these moments? You can literally be blurring the boundary when you're fording a river, or sliding down a steep slope of snow or something like that. But when you really sort of give yourself over to the world that you're running through, and you're dependent upon, gosh, I hope it doesn't start to hail right now, or I hope around the next bend isn't this terrible thing I have to climb, because I don't really have the energy for that. And you compound that with potential injuries that you might have. And I was getting some pretty bad shin splints at one point on that run, where I felt like I just really don't want to continue. And,
How many miles was it at this point? This was an extremely long run.
well, it was 150 miles that broke it
Pretty
into 3
long.
days. Pretty long. But so I think this was on day three was fairly unbearable. Um, in terms of the pain that I was going through. I was like, all right, about 50 miles to do here. And, that was already on the sort of past the northern slope of Iceland. So it was relatively flat, gravel roads mostly rather than single track. So not the most sort of exciting terrain to be going across, but thankfully, it wasn't particularly challenging either. But there was definitely a moment there where I just stopped and thought, you know what, this is like, I could not be sort of farther away from, sort of safety or security or whatever that might be. And, certainly I was not outside the realm of rescue if necessary, but at the same time, you're like, you've given yourself completely over to this landscape. And you're kind of at the mercy of what might come. And so I took that, and you talk about the other runs as well, but I took that back with me and sort of part of my opportunity to use this as a leverage to, start to have conversations with folks further south about climate change was we had some beautiful pictures, right? People love seeing pictures of these landscapes that they don't go to. And, great adventure stories talking about running across these Arctic landscapes. And then saying, all right, you know what? Um, how does this sort of, how can you tie this into your own experience here? And I remember one talk that I was giving to a private school in Ohio, and talking to, I think it was a girls' school actually. So I was talking about a group of 300 sort of soccer and lacrosse playing high school girls. How can they relate to this story? And it really became a conversation about resilience. Um, how can you use these moments of vulnerability to actually build resilience within yourself, and to sort of help build a relationship with the more than human world that maybe you didn't have before? And I think they actually took to that, pretty significantly. Had some great conversations there.
We were talking about climate change and witnessing it firsthand. And you're 55. You have a son. I have a 3-year-old, and I think about this a lot when I talk to parents. And we're going through kind of unprecedented times now. You've seen this stuff up close. You've in many places. Where do you have hope, and where do you find hope and optimism? Looking ahead at knowing that your son is, gonna go on, after you're gone.
Yeah. It's interesting 'cause I've been thinking a lot recently, in the past few months, and I think a lot of us probably have. Where do we find solace? Where do we find that hope and optimism? And I go to literature most often. Being the English major I am, so reading and rereading Gretel Ehrlich's "The Solace of Open Spaces" about Wyoming and her ranching experience there, and that's one of the things that kept drawing me out to the West. Actually, was language like that. But recently, literally in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been reading a lot of Thomas Merton, rereading some of his work, and most recently his book about the desert and sort of the desert fathers and the wisdom of the desert. And there's one line in there that I think I'm going to write another blog post for that blog that I need to keep up with a little bit more regularly, about exactly that the role of the hermit or the seeker or the mystic going out into the desert isn't to go out to the desert and escape everything and leave it all behind, but it's really to go out and be able to understand things in a different way, right? Be able
Mm.
to connect with the world in a different way, connect with yourself in a different way, and then drag everybody with you, right? So invite people to join you on that journey and say, look, you can learn something by doing this. And I mean, it's based on a lot of folks who turned their back on Christianity, centuries ago, because it was too commercialized and it was being, it wasn't true to what they had perceived faith should be. And we're in a similar time now where you could look at society and say, wow, this really isn't all that I had hoped it would be, or it's not all that it's cracked up to be. Let me go for a 100-mile run. And the idea going for the 100-mile run is not to like, I want to be out there forever, but then what is it that you can bring back from that you can share with other folks, right? And I used this, and I think part of the hopefulness, and I think my son has gotten some of that. He's at Colorado College majoring in documentary film, so he wants to tell stories about people's relationship with place, which I think is a really great tool that's sort of similar in some ways to what I've been doing. I think one high point for me in my really, really long career has been I developed a master's program when I was at Schumacher College in England called Movement, Mind, and Ecology. And it was the first program of its kind where you really took those three things, embodied movement practice, environmental philosophy, and ecological systems thinking, and brought them together in a really transdisciplinary way. And we had people, doing research to develop the course. I talked to guide services across the UK. We had Lizzie Hawker come and talk. We had a number of other folks, come join us from endurance athletics, from dance, from yoga. And how can you actually use movement as a way to leverage change in people's relationship to the environment, right? So the outcome of the course was, like the last module was to have the students do some sort of facilitated community-based activity that would then, help them connect even with their backyard gardens or even a hedgerow near their house or whatever it is. This was born during COVID when we were all sort of, isolated in our homes. I thought, all right, all I have access to right now is the little forest right outside my house. How can I recreate some of what I experienced in the Arctic, in that relationship? And that was where this project and this program was developed, right? So I think for me, the hope comes through that education and bringing people, or dragging people, right, to the firsthand experience, the embodied practice, so that they can say, all right, you know what, this is meaningful. So I'm going to slightly shift my behavior so that I can do this more and I can preserve this environment that I'm engaged with.
Do you remember any of those projects that the finishing or the final projects that the students had to do, like offhand?
I don't from that class.
Okay.
Yeah, right off. But I know that a number of them are continuing to work in that field.
Okay.
And so, we had professionals from guide services that came, and there was this the young woman that was guiding, I think, in Wales, and she was able to make that experience more meaningful for the clients, right? Because they would come up from London and they would go and like, oh, we're going to kayak for 2 days, go back to London and have this great experience. But then it becomes this transactional experience. Like you've done this physical thing in a beautiful place, you post it on Instagram, and there you go. But by building in the sort of relationship with the more than human world, and really focusing on that idea of relationality instead of transaction, you're able to shift and make meaningful, I think, that experience even more for the people. The one sort of project that stands out was a senior at Sterling College who, as part of it was an applications of environmental philosophy course that I was teaching, upper level class. And he went down, he cut a bunch of trees off the school's property, and built basically a jungle gym for adults on campus, where he thought, I want to use the natural resources that we have here on the campus to build this thing where people can move their bodies in concert with the trees, right? And actually, have that sort of very personal embodied experience. And I was amazed that they let us do it because it wasn't to any sort of safety code or
Yeah. That was my
yeah.
This experience might get a little too embodied real quick.
Yeah, right. Well, just call 911. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
my first thought was there an insurance inspection? But yeah, that's great.
I'm not allowed to talk about that.
Yeah.
When you started Climate Run, you indicated that you thought it might be a little bit more about individual choices, thinking about local gear, recycling your things, being a more responsible consumer, and sort of existing in that world that I think a lot of the outdoor industry lives in, where we couch all climate action as like inherently a sort of consumerist project, like we can buy, recycle our way out of this. But somewhere on the Iceland run, you changed your mind and it sort of widened your aperture on how you could engage with climate. What happened to make you change your mind?
Well, I think it's a little what I described earlier, right? And, I'll say, and I sort of get from how you're framing that, Zoe, that there is a bit of sort of critical perspective on that, right?
There's a hint of baked in. Yeah.
I think I'm with you on that. But unfortunately, I think it's a debate that we have to have with a lot of people. Let's still go on my soapbox for a second, right? We've been put in this circumstance, not of our own choosing, right? Where, somebody else is profiting from this sort of commercial context that we're operating in. That buying the shoes that are 50% recycled is not really that much better for the overall sort of climate challenge and issue than than buying the shoes that aren't. I mean, they're still costing $150 these days. So what happened, I think about another illustration, this seems to happen on every long run that I take, right? And it did start to shift in Iceland. And I think largely it was recognizing that it was for me, it was more about the relationship between the embodied experience and the more than human world. And coming out of that experience in Iceland, I started to teach all of these courses in applications of environmental philosophy and thinking about how you take these or more intellectual concepts. How do you take, Timothy Morton, for example, and say, we're going to build something that's based on helping people understand hyperobjects better, or helping people understand our relationship with ecological thought better. And so I thought, you know what, I'm out here, I'm doing this thing. And I think a way to find a sort of more significant leverage point in the system, thinking about Donella Meadows and what the leverage points are there, right, would be to go, so she has this hierarchy of, I think, 12 different leverage points, right? And she says most of us spend our time on the very top things like, oh, well, let's, add 1% to this, or let's change 5 minutes of our daily habit and do this, instead of thinking about, well, we need to actually shift the paradigm of how we relate to one another and how we relate to the world, because that's going to change everything else, right? So I thought, all right, I can go deeper in this hierarchy by talking about people's relationality and how we actually engage with the world rather than what we buy. So I think that's really where that shift happened. And there was a literal part where I was, screaming at a goose, in the middle of Iceland. And fortunately, there wasn't really anybody around to hear me swear. But I thought, that was the moment, probably, if I was to put my finger on it. A very explicit. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, what was
This
going
goose
on
is like,
there?
I did not want to be a part of this guy's awakening.
like
I did not sign up for this mindset shift right now.
Did the goose mess up your latte order or something? And you were just like, no.
Well, this was out in the middle of nowhere still. So this was, this was on day 3, whatever, 120 some odd miles into the run. And I was having, some significant shin pain at that time. And I had, taken however many dozen of Advil that I had, and none of that seemed to be helping. And I thought, you know what? It's a little bit unlike me to sort of stop in the middle of a run and just lean over my poles and say, fuck, as loud as you possibly can. At that time, a goose was like frightened by that and just took off flying. So I was like, oh my, talk about my impact on the more than human world.
So this is like another freaking middle-aged guy came out the middle of nowhere here so that he could discover himself and have a paradigm shift in my backyard.
Yep. I know.
He's like, I'll tell you what, fuck you. That's what. I'm out of here.
He didn't start circling back to try to poop on me.
Did that bring you, was that a moment of levity then at that point? Or was that just kind of like, were you laughing at yourself? Like, wow, this is something.
It would have been had I been, 20 miles closer to the end point.
Yeah, right. You're right.
But I will say that, again, these moments repeat themselves. They're just, and you all know, right? Being out, there's always some moment like where, it's just before sunrise and you happen to see, like I did this morning, I happen to see just the sun off the top of one tree. And you're like, you know what? That's just, I got to stop for a second and just recognize where I am, the privilege that I have to do this. How can I capture this moment and take it with me for the rest of the day, or, until I get to do this again. And one of my favorite runs was actually the one, the Nordkalotladen, which was near it sort of parallels the Kungsleden along the Norwegian-Swedish border. And there, it was probably about, what, 400 miles or so. And, I liked it because I took all of my kit with me, and, resupplied every 4 or 5 days, but was running, 50, 60 kilometers a day, with all of my stuff. And that gave me a great opportunity to just completely disconnect and no resupply, being out there. But at several points, I was probably, 40 kilometers from the nearest person. Um, and just recognizing that. And there was a moment that I, distinctly remember, and I, stopped and I took a video and a photo and all of that because this was the moment. It was probably about 10 p.m. or so, and, midnight sun. So the sun was really low over the mountains I was on the Swedish side, the mountains between Norway and Sweden, and it was completely silent. No wind, blue sky, the sun really low. And, I had already gone like 40, 45K or something. So I was tired. I was like day 4, and just stopped and looked. And at one point I had this photo that was my backdrop for a long time, was the sun casting a shadow of me on the tundra, right? Just beyond. And like, that's me in the landscape. And for me, that really resonated with sort of making that deep connection of vulnerability with that place. Um, and, then I packed up my stuff and I kept on going. Right. But, those are the moments that, for me are really special and that I always want to try to capture. And then also to be able to bring those back. And for me, the vehicle for doing that has been, well, 1, through writing, and 2, through teaching, right? To have the privilege of say, I want to teach a class that tries to get at that idea, and,
Mm.
take people out and do the thing that they can then reflect on.
Hmm. To change gears a little bit, how are you enjoying Arizona and in the Western United States?
A lot, actually. Yeah. It's a bit of a shift, having moved from the southwest of England, to the southwest of the US in Arizona. I describe it to friends as being almost entirely the opposite on every level, right? And that's from, being in a place where when I first moved to Devon, in the southwest there, it rained from October to February every single day. And, then I get here, and it was all green and, lush and farmland and everything. And, nationalized healthcare and, sort of a social democracy, really sort of this culture of care. Moving to Arizona is kind of the opposite on virtually every level. Um, but but that said, I don't live in Phoenix, right? Which I think would not really be a good fit for me. But to move in a place like Prescott, where we're up at 5,500 feet, surrounded by national forest on 3 sides, I can see the San Francisco peaks and the snow cap over by Flagstaff from my house. It's not too not that far. The recreation here is pretty unbelievable. Last weekend, my wife and I went to drove close to Sedona and just on some of the trails in the Red Rock, and we could go swimming because it was warm enough. Just sort of that engagement with recreation you know is so important for me. And I've taken up mountain biking too, because again, every trail is graded for mountain biking here. So yeah, I think it's been really good. And the college itself, I've known about Prescott College, for 20, 30 years. These circles are pretty small, when you get into this sort of experiential progressive education. So, there are people here that I worked with at Green Mountain College, that I worked with at Sterling College. We've had students come from Schumacher College in England to Prescott College. And, it is
Yeah.
all sort of one big, happy, experiential family. So yeah, I
Yeah.
really like it.
Yeah, I find Arizona to be a very geographically interesting state. I lived there for about a year, but yeah, there's a pretty big canyon a little ways north of you, if I remember correctly too. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
I've
worth
seen it.
worth going up there, I think.
I've seen it. I've run down, like, when I came for my interview, actually, um, which was, I've only been here for a couple of years, so not too long ago. It was in January. And I thought, all right, one, I was really sick. So I was taking all sorts of cold medicine during the interview. I was like, oh crap, but they still gave me the job. So it must have been okay. But then, yeah, I said, all right, where should I go running? And I looked at the maps, like, oh yeah, there's this little canyon. Um, so I went and ran down to the river and back, um, and thought, wow, yeah, this is really cool. Like, being down and being on the trails is so different than, looking at it from above, which is what most people do. And so then I went and did that again, and cut an hour off that time, and really was hoping to do a rim to rim to rim this year. Although we'll need to see, because the fire on the North Rim had really decimated access, and
Mhm.
I want to be respectful of that. And the trails are going to be closed for a while still. So, but that's definitely on my short list of things to do in this area.
Yeah, it's a good one. It really shrinks the canyon down, but you also have to remind yourself that it is the easiest way across when you do it. Like
But
a mile in either direction, you'd be dead. But
yeah, have you read that book, A Walk in the Park?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I know
That's,
Kevin actually. Yeah.
speaking of going the other way, right?
My God. Yeah. He's not exaggerating how clueless and unprepared they were. Yeah.
Hell of a
Yeah,
path of least resistance.
it's a
Yes.
pretty
Yeah.
incredible story, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So you sort of introduced the idea of resilience earlier, but this framework of resilience over resistance. Could you walk us through what that means and why you think that framework is helpful for maybe endurance running, climate, all of the above?
Yeah, well, I think one, it speaks to sort of flexibility, right? And I've adapted that over time. I actually haven't used that framework for a while, but and now talk about I have another website there called the Regenerative Learning Network, where I talk about regenerative frameworks, as a sort of as to be distinct from sustainability. And we've run programs in regenerative design and regenerative economics and food systems and education and those sorts of things. And I think the resilience and regeneration are pretty related. One is embedded in the other, and again, it is about adaptation, flexibility, co-creation, collaboration, all of those really juicy keywords that I use and that you come across in places like Tim Horton or other academic papers, right? Where, um, you know, I think the approach of trying to resist something like climate change, like let's build a seawall around New York, or um, let's do what we can to save ourselves from this thing, which is another thing, which is separate from us, right?
Mm.
How instead do we actually build a relationship with that thing, sort of intractable, wicked problem that is climate change, right? I think we're we're much more apt to be successful, if we recognize, have some humility, and like resistance is futile, right? So I think it's building that resilience through relationality that will actually allow us to do more meaningful change, have more meaningful change, because I think what we're really good at as a sort of neoliberal capitalist commercial society is trying to resist things.
Mm.
We love the way that things have been. We're going to keep things this way. What can we do to make sure that they stay this way all the time? And I think that is not at all a regenerative mindset.
One of my favorite books is Thinking Like a Mall by Stephen Vogel, which is a play on the Aldo Leopold Thinking Like a Mountain, and makes the argument that the problem is thinking of ourselves as separate from nature. And I think this is something that particularly like the outdoor industry, the running space struggles with, as like thinking of ourselves separate from this thing. But I also think endurance running has this sort of unique capacity to make us feel like to break down that artificial barrier of me moving through like the environment and I am separate from it. And like, even the idea of wilderness insinuates that like any human connection with it is like inherently degrading of that space.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you're subtly referencing there William Cronin's, The Trouble with Wilderness, essay from the '90s, which really sort of set that foundation that if you start if you start separating the wilderness or nature, or boxing it apart from yourself, right, then you're going to do much more damage. If you create a park and say, "Oh, this park is wonderful," then I can bulldoze everything else because at least I have a park left. I think that's super problematic. Um, and we're in a difficult moment, I think, where endurance running, ultra marathons are incredibly popular, and lots of races get sold out, and lots of people are trying to participate in this in that way, where it becomes really quite transactional. And I think, thinking about that program that I developed in England, the Movement Mind and Ecology one, like, wouldn't it be cool if there were, like running clubs or groups that really leaned into that idea of, ecological thinking and engagement with the more than human, and not moving through a landscape, right? I taught a course on adventure literature, several years ago. And one of the students took us to task and said, "Why are we reading all of these like adventure narratives about conquering place, moving from point A to point B, and planting your flag someplace, right? Like that's a good thing." And like absolutely, and I think occasionally you have athletes, trail runners, other folks today thinking in similar terms, like I want to get the FKT, I want to do this thing, but how can we just? It's kind of funny. How can we pause in that and maybe slow down slightly? Think about building our relationship that way.
Yeah. Is there something like, you know, many of us are training for a race or a few races that we do over, maybe 2, 3, 4 things a year? Is there something in viewing it as a practice that like we're training or running on trails, multiple times a week, maybe, or at least multiple times a month? Is there something you would suggest or that you do personally in those times that connects that people could connect more to instead of viewing it as a transactional, like this is just something I'm doing to get to the race to do this faster to meet the time requirement or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have our own perspectives, right? And I think we've talked about age a little bit here today, and I think age for me plays a more significant role now. I went to a doctor the other day, and they said, "Well, people over 55 really shouldn't climb ladders anymore, or do things like that because if they fall, they could get greater trauma." I'm like, "No, I'm getting another doctor. I'm sorry."
Did you just say, bro?
I'm keeping the ladders.
That's right.
Drawn the line at ladders.
Well, ladders, but what about ice climbing? Does that
We gotta
What
talk.
about going up rickety waterfalls with knife hands?
Yeah,
Yes
exactly.
or no? How are we feeling on that?
So, I mean, the context for that is I'm slowing down a bit, right? I'm not going to be pushing, the FKTs on anything as much as I might want to. And I do take those moments and pause, right? Like on today's run, I stopped a couple of times, like, oh, there's the sunrise on the mountain, or there's this thing that I want to stop and sort of engage with. And I think there are ways to do that from a sort of more sort of personal, engaged perspective. But I also think that, I love to see a lot of the races now have requirements for service. And I think doing that is a really sort of tangible way that people who are engaged in these activities like don't just do the minimum amount. Like hopefully you'll get hooked and actually become part of a local trail group or some sort of environmental group. I think those are really great opportunities as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things I like about your framework of vulnerability that you talked about and how that can open up that space for connection. Because I feel like one of the bits of criticism often levied against like FKTs or people who like to move quickly through landscapes, and I identify as being in that group, even though I'm definitely not moving like fast enough to not be able to see stuff, like not going at warp speed. But for me, that like pushing and trying to run faster opens up that vulnerability and makes possible that even deeper connection just at pace.
Exactly. Yes.
This is great, Pavel. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, the highlight of my day for sure. Love it.
I need to tell you about one of the most charming races I have ever seen, the White Lake Ultras, happening May 2nd at White Lake State Park. At White Lake State Park in Tamworth, New Hampshire. It's a 2-mile single-track loop around this gorgeous forested lakefront, and you just keep going. Pick your poison. 6 hours, 12 hours, or if you're feeling spicy, a full 24. Each loop has about 50 feet of climbing and a little stretch of beach, which honestly sounds like the kind of running I was put on this earth to do. Low-key, loopy, and beautiful. Here's what I love about this event. It's cupless, so you bring your own bottle or hydration vest. They're really passionate about being sustainable and keeping it green and clean out there, which I respect. You can set up camp right by the lake for the weekend. Your crew can hang out at the beach, which, amazing. If you need crew, hit a girl up. And this is so important, costumes are highly encouraged. I repeat, costumes are encouraged. So if you've ever wanted to run a lap dressed as a lobster or a pine tree, this is your moment. No pacers, but if you want company, grab a friend and sign them up for the 6 or 12 hour. Pro tip, do try to get consent before you sign your bestie up for a 24-hour event. Registration closes on April 27th. Sign up now at ultrasignup.com and go get loopy at White Lake.
Thanks for joining us on the Trailhead. If you love this episode, leave us a review, share it with your trail crew, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss an adventure. Give us a follow on Instagram at TrailheadPod. And you can reach us anytime at trailhead@ultrasignup.com. We'd love to hear your stories, questions, guest ideas, or just to say hi. And don't forget to check out all of the shows in the Ultra Podcast Network. We're building something special, and it's just for you. We'll see you every other week, right here on the Trailhead.